And a new report shows ICE has been arresting undocumented adults who come forward to take immigrant children in government custody. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Trump administration arrested 170 undocumented immigrants who came forward. More than 100 of those arrested had no criminal record. Joining me now with more on this is the article's author, San Francisco Chronicle Washington correspondent Tal Kopan. Tal, thank you so much for joining us. Who exactly are these people coming forward to claim these immigrant children, and what exactly happens to them when they do?
That's a great question. So the way it works is when an undocumented child arrives at the U.S. border or is found to be here by themselves. Now, this came into focus with the family separations that happened over the summer, but the majority of the children we're talking about actually arrive at the U.S. by themselves. They go into this extensive shelter network in government custody, and the only way out of that network really is either by turning 18 or for an adult to come forward to sponsor them. And those sponsors tend to be relatives. Sometimes they are even parents living in the United States, but they're often relatives who are already here. Many of them are immigrants themselves. Many of them may be undocumented immigrants themselves, but they go through this process of background check for safety to make sure that these children are being released to a suitable home. And then the children can go to that home and then pursue their court cases to make a case as to why they should be able to stay in the U.S.
Right.
The problem is, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so then during that background check is what I'm assuming it becomes clear they're undocumented, and that's when they're arrested.
That's correct. So in the past, the system has worked for a long time. Some folks may remember the 2014 sort of surge of immigrant children who were coming to the border when there was really an overcrowding of this system under the Obama administration. This system has been working for some time, and part of that is that they didn't take into account immigration status as part of that background check. So of course they checked for criminal records, they checked for anything that would cause a red flag for that children to go to that home, but they didn't actually consider whether or not the parent was documented themselves. The changes come under the Trump administration. They made a decision to use ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to background check these parents, fingerprint other adults in the homes. And now ICE has apparently been using that information to arrest some of those adults themselves. And it's causing a lot of fear and concern in the community, the immigrant community, the folks who advocate for these children, who say that all that's going to do is make this system overburdened with children who can't leave and create more unsafe situations, because these adults who could otherwise be sort of loving homes for these children allow them to pursue their court cases. It makes these adults have second thoughts about coming forward and or perhaps finding someone else who could pretend to be the actual sponsor. It just creates an unsafe situation for these children.
And so once someone is arrested for coming forward and turning out to be undocumented, then what happens to the children that person is attempting to care for?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so when someone comes forward, tries to claim the child, and ICE does the background check and determines that person is undocumented and then arrests them, what happens to the child that the person was trying to care for?
Yeah, that's another great question. So that child then, if they cannot find a sponsor who is considered suitable to come forward, those children stay in this system. And, you know, another fact in the story, we find out we are close to 15,000 children who are in this system. You know, last month I reported that we broke 14,000 for the first time. We are now already hundreds above that, pushing 15,000. These are record-setting numbers of children in this system. They are over 90% capacity. They had to open a tent facility in Texas to accommodate thousands more children. The longer these children stay, and if there are no sponsors who are deemed eligible, or if those sponsors are taken into immigration detention themselves, these children just stay in the system potentially until they turn 18, at which point it might be that ICE takes them into adult detention. So when you ask what happens to them, we're really entering a gray area. We haven't seen a situation where this many children are getting bottled up into the system that really was ultimately designed to be a bridge. Many of these children come to the U.S. traumatized from either what happened to them where they were or what happened to them along the way. This was not designed to be a permanent facility. It's designed to be a bridge until they can get into a stable home and pursue their immigration case.
So it seemed these ICE arrests are sort of exacerbating the situation and shooting themselves in the foot, as they were, by just continuing to make it a bigger problem. Tal, I want to ask you about the Democratic lawmakers who have spoken out against this practice of arresting these people who've come forward. What do they propose doing about it?
That's right. So there's two pieces of legislation, one in the House and one in the Senate, that have been proposed that would basically make it, illegal for ICE to do what they're doing. So the reason this changed was in the spring, there was a lot of concern about whether there was actually oversight into whether the kids were being placed into the homes that the government thought they were. In response, the government signed this agreement between ICE and Health and Human Services, which manages the shelter network, to allow for ICE to do those background checks. What the legislation would do is say that ICE can still do that, but they cannot use the information that comes out of that process to go around and do their immigration enforcement. So it would basically say you can do the checks for safety, but you can't then use that information to round up adults for arrest as well.
All right, Tal Kopan, thank you so much for your reporting on this very important issue.
Thank you.